Hello, we're very pleased to welcome you to this, the fifth of our PNFS online talks. Tonight we're delighted to welcome Andy Leader. Andy is a Courts and Inquiries Officer for PNFS, and he does a lot of work for us in Kirklees and Calderdale. Until about 10 years ago, Andy was a Rights of Way officer, and he continues to inspect footpaths for PNFS today. But since then, he's become a successful professional photographer, specialising in landscapes in the Holme Valley where he lives, and taking wonderful photos in Scotland, the Peak District and Wales. Tonight he's going to be taking us to some of his favourite places via his photography, and will be giving us some tips on how we can improve our attempts at photographing landscapes.
Yeah, so I always like to start with the last photo I ever took, which was this one yesterday evening when I was out walking on a path I use very, very regularly, just at the top of the Holme Valley, just inside the Peak District National Park, and that's just typical kind of, well, it's West Yorkshire Pennine Sea. I'm going to go through what type of lenses I use in a moment, and this is a wide angle lens that I have. It's 12 millimeters to 22 millimeters, so it is a very wide angle lens, and this will be at about 12 millimeters. So that's a lot of frame to fill up, and it's quite challenging in this kind of landscape, which it's rolling and flattish really with cloughs. It's not spectacular like the Peak District, like the Lake District or the Dales, or mountainous like Scotland. So it's actually quite challenging to get a half decent photograph really. You've always got to think of the composure of your shot really carefully. Otherwise you end up just getting something right in the distance and nothing at all in the foreground. In my dreams, every day would be like this. There'd be some fantastic Ashley Jackson dramatic kind of light sweeping across the hills, and I could just sort of stand there and point my camera and fire away willy-nilly, and get some wonderful shots of cow parsley and the rays of sunlight coming through the clouds like that. But in reality, you spend a lot of time outside, looking and observing, and you might get 2 or 3 decent photographs a month, and that's why it's good to be into walking and enjoy walking and inspecting footpaths as well. So even if you come back with no photos, you've had some exercise, you've had a good walk, and you've enjoyed the surroundings. My most important piece of equipment, and I'm being quite serious here, is a long line of mongrel dogs going back to 1981, and this is the latest one. And the thing with dogs, the shortcomings of photography is that you need to get out, and sometimes it's raining, or you think it's going to rain, or it's dark and you need to get out of bed, or etc. etc. If you have a dog, they get you out of the house at the most inconvenient times, and it's something you need to do and get out of the way. You do it early, you do it late. They drag you out when you wouldn't normally have gone out. And I've got a lot of photos because of this dog and his predecessors getting me into various little places. This was one evening I wasn't going anywhere, and I took him for a short walk at the top of the Wesendon Valley, and I hadn't noticed that the bog cotton was out, and just over the brow of the hill, it was absolutely stunning. And the sun was about to set, and Laddo there sat down, and I'd have not got that picture. I'd have not been there if it wasn't for the dog, Now I know everyone can't have a dog, and the other magic ingredient, of course, is time, having the time to do this. And all that comes before cameras and lenses and things like that, if you don't have the time and the reason to be out there. And that's the last dog picture, I promise. That was the very last walk I did before lockdown last year, 15 miles on Wild Boar Fell and Malastang Edge, and then we didn't go anywhere for God knows how long really after that. I used to look at this picture on my screen and weep really. All that freedom had just been taken away. So I'm not a hugely technical person. I've taught myself photography. I've done courses, but I've always found it very dry and quite dull, and I seem to be the kind of person that learns by doing. these are the three lenses I use. The one on the left is a 600mm long lens, and I don't really know why I got that. I had a good 300mm lens, and I wanted to extend that and perhaps do some wildlife photography. So I got this humongously heavy thing, which I cart around with me. And I've got some nice shots with it, including some nice landscapes, but I don't use it that much, really. The lens I use most of all are the other two, the wide angle one in the middle, which is 12 to 22mm. And then a really nice, it's not a Nikon lens, it's a Canon lens. I lost the lens cap. It's a 28 to 80mm lens, and I use that probably more than the wide angle lens. Actually, it does take such lovely photographs. You'll see on the central lens there, it has a polarizing filter on, which I've rarely used that, but the sky was blue today. Blue skies are not great for the kind of photography I do, but a polarizing filter is very useful in those conditions. It cuts out glare and it enhances the colors. I'm showing you this setup here. It's the wide angle lens, and on the front of it is a neutral density filter. I don't know whether anyone's seen one of those before or knows what one is. But as a landscape photographer, you've got this eternal battle of getting an even exposure, if you've got sky in the picture, between the brightness of the sky, even on a dull day, and the darkness of the land. And many times the camera just can't cope with it. So if you use all that is a grey filter that filters out several stops of light. And if you use that on the sky, it evens out your exposure, and you pick up a lot more detail in the clouds and the sky. And you'll see that in some of the photos I'm going to show you. And the camera is just a Canon D80, and modern cameras, there's so much on them. Most of it I hardly ever use. The controls that matter are the size of the aperture and the aperture speed and the ISO, which is the sensitivity to light of your sensor. It's those three things that you can adjust on manual. And the rest of it, I hardly ever use it. They're just gimmicky, really. It's those three things that control the light coming into the camera. And for landscapes, if you can get your aperture between 8 and 11, you'll get a nice sharp photograph, you know, and the faster the shutter speed, the better. And ISO is, when we used to use film, you'd get like rolls of 100 ISO film speed, but now or 200 or 400 or 600. But now you can change that speed with every single shot on a digital camera. It's a really fantastic thing. But the higher you go on that scale, the more grain you can get in your photograph. I just wanted to say something about editing before we go any further. Your camera will edit your photographs in the camera for you, probably without you even knowing it. You might have it on a landscape setting or a portrait setting. So it chooses the color settings, the warmth of the colors, the contrasts, the highlights, the shadows. It does all that for you if you shoot in JPEG files. So when you download it onto your laptop or whatever, the camera's got rid of a lot of really useful information because you've shot it in JPEG. The other way to do it is to shoot in something called RAW files, which are much bigger, but the camera doesn't process those files. You get all the basic information, so it's a much bigger file, and the photograph, when you download it, will look very flat and quite bland, but that's because if you put it into something like Lightroom, you can then edit it yourself. You can choose the saturation, the contrast, the warmth of the colors. Anywhere where you've got a shadow, you can perhaps lift that a little bit or drop the exposure in places. Just really basic stuff like that, the kind of thing you might have done in a dark room. There are all sorts of other things, again, you can do. You can put things in your photo that weren't there, take things out, etc. But I don't really go into that. It's just basic stuff to try and keep the pictures based in reality, really. I don't know whether, if you see, can you, well, oops, hang on. And if all that's that's as technical as I'm going to get, you can go down lots of rabbit holes in photography and spend hours and all your money on all sorts of things. I don't think there's any need to, really. And whatever camera you have, even if it's a phone or a point and shoot or whatever, it's better than having no camera at all if you see something. And one of my most favorite photos that I took was with a point and shoot basic digital camera that somebody gave me for nothing. They were going to throw it away. And I took this picture of Glen Dooley Bothy with one of my old dogs, my wife and my kids there on the left. And it's only because I kind of took my time and composed it. And at the last minute, the dog just wandered into shot like that, so that I've got something right in the foreground, and that was it. Nailed it, I thought. And it's, I don't know, it's 14 years old, that photo now, and with every year it just gets better and better. My little lad on the right there, he's 6'6" now. But getting back to landscapes, I've always had a very strong connection with the land. I've worked outside a lot of my life. I've always done a lot of walking. We did that when we were kids. It was all there was to do, basically. And I was one of the peculiar ones in that I actually liked it. So my photography comes out of this connection going back many, many years, wanting to see places, wanting to walk through places and explore places, and ultimately try and capture some of it on a photograph and bring it back with me for myself, my own satisfaction, but to share as well. The more you do that, the more you get in tune with the seasons. And I go back to the same kind of places over and over again. This is West Nab above Meltham, and I don't know, I must have been up there 800 times in the last 15 years. And it's never the same twice, you know. The sun's different every day, you know, on this yearly cycle. You get the snow up there in the winter, there's heather in August, September, and then you get the weather coming in like this, and you get these showers rolling in, and it's all that kind of interplay. You know, you could go up there one day and it could be really dull and boring. You go up the next day and it can be like this. That photo is taken with the wide angle lens and with a very light neutral density filter. So you can see there's a lot of detail in that sky. If I'd have taken that sky without the filter, it would still be okay, but it wouldn't have all that lovely detail that's actually in there. And it might have thrown the bottom half of the picture out and made that burnt out or too light. I hope I'm making sense, am I? Yeah?
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
So I like these Pennine skies, and I'm very attracted to it. I've no connection with Ashley Jackson, but he's well known for painting this kind of sky and this kind of thing. And again, this is the wide angle lens, and it kind of shows the importance of getting something in the foreground, because it was the oilseed rape that caught my eye, and Castle Hill above Huddersfield in the distance, and the sky. But if you just take a picture of the field without the wall, it's all too open, and there's not enough interest there. Behind that big rock on the right of the stile is a housing estate, but if I crouch down, I could kind of crop that out in the field, as it were. So I find it's always good when you're there, if you get a bit excited, fire a few shots off, get the excitement out of your system, and then start again and have a think about it, and, you know, move to the left or the right a bit and get lower down than stood on your feet, you know, crouch down, kneel down, and it just slightly changes your perspective and the angle of things, and creates, or it can create something, you know, wonderful, really. And this is an example of using a kind of line, the paving stones into the picture, because what you're trying to do, or I try to do with a photograph, especially with a wider angle lenses, is get some depth to it. It's something that's 2D, but how do you get some kind of depth into it? And if you get a line leading into it like that, it's almost as if you could step onto that paving and walk away down into the clough there. And you've got to get low to get that. I've been back again to these flags many, many times, and it's never been that good again. This was about 10 years ago. 6 in the morning, just as the sun come up. This was the same kind of thing. This is an awful footpath, Holme Valley footpath 46 that I inspect every year. It's always cropped, and sometimes a tractor wheel, coincides with the footpath, and sometimes it doesn't. But this particular evening, it made quite a nice photo with a line of tread where people had been walking, and the right kind of wheat there, and again just that little bit of a filter on the top of the sky there to get that detail, and the line leading into it, giving it some kind of depth. And this is Loose Hill catching a shower of haily rain last June. You'll often hear in photography something called the rule of thirds, and it seems, I don't consciously do it or follow it, but unconsciously you just do seem to compose photos in that kind of way, in thirds, divide it up into thirds, as you can see from this one, and it just creates a pleasing effect, really. Most people think, but I wouldn't go out of my way to do it, but once you get into it, you just seem to do it subconsciously. And it's always nice, I think. I love dry stone walls, and if I can get a stone wall running through a photograph like that, it's wonderful, especially with a cream crackered old gate on the posts like that, and the sheep, and then some weather coming in behind. This is another example of trying to get depth. The length of that dry stone wall there, which is on Pennygents in the Dales, actually the footpath there going off to the left, and which also gives the photograph depth. That's the Pennine Way down to Churnmilk Hall, and the hill in the distance is Pendle Hill. And I'd got the train up to Settle from Huddersfield, and I'd walked in 2 hours, absolutely pouring rain. And about 15 minutes before this photograph was taken, it kind of started to pass over, and it was the evening, and the sun came in under this cloud and just illuminated the whole landscape in that way. But even with that kind of quality of light, it still needed something. So I leaned against the wall and just got that depth, running away for miles and miles. And having something spectacular in the foreground, like people call it the Trinicle. This is above Greenfield Reservoir on Saddleworth Moor. I'd actually gone up there this day to try and take a selfie standing, because it's easy to climb up onto that pinnacle, and I had my tripod and self-timer, but it was actually a very windy day, so I thought better of it. But I waited an hour or so for a bit of light to just drift across and lift the sandstone and bring out the colour and the detail in it. And it's quite a dramatic effect, again, with that sky in the background. One of my favourite times is what we're sort of coming into now, is into the winter, and especially because of snow. When it snows, a landscape they can be so familiar with is changed instantly. This is a road I regularly walk along, a lane I regularly walk along. I know it like the back of my hand, every nook and cranny, the walls on the other side of the valley. But when there's snow falling and snow on the ground, it becomes something else. It's quite a magical thing, actually. And this all fell in about 20 minutes, and there'd been no cars down the road, as there's some footprints. So the road was just pristine white, and the walls were getting blasted with snow, and there's still snowflakes falling in the air. This particular, I trespassed to get this tree. I was about 100 yards off the public footpath here, which isn't something I normally do, because I have the dog, so I like to be sure of I'm in the right. But I'd wanted a photo of this tree for years, and there was a sunset developing that night, so I got up there really quickly, and I got all set up with the tripod and took this picture just as the sun went down. Was really pleased with it. And then I saw these headlights and this Land Rover coming across the field, and the farmer pulled up and he said, what are you doing here? You know, kind of thing. And I laughed and I said, oh, you know, fair cop, I was taking a picture of the tree, you know. And he just laughed and he said, oh, well, you know, it takes all sorts, mate, doesn't it? You know, and he was quite happy. I know a few farmers around here now because they see me taking pictures of the sheep getting fed in the winter and stuff like that. And I think they think I'm balmy. This is a classic dog photo, this one, of Holme Moss. Last November, I'd been in all day, it rained all day. I wouldn't have gone anywhere, but the dog needed to go out before, you know, we shut down for the evening. And I took him on a short walk. I wasn't even going to take the camera because it looked so gloomy, but I picked it up at the last minute. We walked half a mile to the edge of Ramsden Clough, and there was all this temperature inversion just kind of starting to kick off. And the colours, the autumn colours still down there in the clough. And again, it's easy when you're taking photographs just to be drawn to the mist and zoom in and try and get the mist, when actually you want that as a backdrop, and you want a lot of interesting foreground and midground between you and the mist to make a complete kind of picture. The other filters I use are hard filters. So one of those square pieces of glass, which is just a solid black, which will take out 4 or 5 stops of light. And you can use those for doing this technique, which is to slow water down and get that flowing effect. You do need a tripod. You can't really get this right handheld, but you know, any 10, 15 seconds when the water's really flowing will give you that lovely kind of effect on the water. And you can see the tree branches are moving as well in the wind. So I always have one of those with me, and at least a lightweight tripod. This was Padley Gorge, where I actually fell in here after I took this picture. I'd gone out into the middle of the stream, rock hopping, and got the tripod on a rock, and it was very precarious. And I was really pleased I got the photo, and I kind of took my mind off the job and slipped, landed bum first in the river. But the camera was okay. But it's a lovely effect if you can get some autumn colour like that, the flowing water, the debris in the river and mosses. And you only need, like I say, 10, 15 seconds when the water's flowing quickly like that to get that wonderful effect. Another time when you would use the tripod, and possibly a light solid filter, is on a dark evening. This was taken in the pitch black. It was pitch black dark when I took this photograph from the cliff up on Holme Valley, looking down on the town in the snow. So the snow was giving off, you know, background kind of light, and you could see the roads and the street lights. And this is about a minute long exposure it did have a very light, if I remember, very 2-stop kind of solid filter on it, just to even things out. But you get the flow of the traffic going up and down Greenfield Road, the lights in the houses. There's a lot of detail in there when you look at it, actually. I can see people's houses, I know, and the cars on the driveways and stuff like that. But you get the town there, and then the moors that are all dark in the background. And it's easier than it looks to do that, actually. It's quite, I quite regularly take people up there and do this, and they're always amazed at the results that they can get. And that's the same evening, just a different perspective with a wider lens. That one, that's with the 80mm lens. And you can see the same road, that's with, you know, 12mm on the wide angle lens. And when you take the photo, it's tricky to compose because you can't see what you're looking at really until you've taken it. And then, you know, you might have to take it 3 or 4 times to get it right, make little adjustments as you go along. Trees, I love isolated trees. And there aren't that many of them about around here, and it's difficult to sort of isolate them. And this was one evening when we had light on one side of the valley and partial shade on the other, and this little sycamore in the wall down there. It just stood out against the bright fields on the other side. There's no footpath, there's no access any closer to this tree than there. So you can't, it's taken from the road, this, and it's the only place you can really see this tree. And that is kind of, I wish there was a footpath where that gate post is. It would be perfect, but you can't go there. And again, that just shows you the value of access to the countryside. You know, there's some wonderful views from the rights of way network and from the Crow access land. But think of all the views you can't see because it's private. I often think of that. I don't know whether it's a strange thing to think, but there must be so many spectacular views that you never see because it's not open to the public. That big lens I showed you at the beginning, the 600mm lens, it does this thing quite well. These are fields at the top of Issues Road, at the top of the valley, and the kind of odd, the way that they punch into the open moorland. They're the highest fields in the valley, but they're kind of attractive in a way when the farmer's taken the silage off them and the heather comes into bloom. And that big 600mm lens just allows you to isolate that little area and get something a little bit different. And again, that's the same kind of area, an old farmstead called Barton and a lone sycamore and the purple heather beyond. And if you took that with the wide angled or the 80mm, it would be lost in the scale of the landscape. But with a bigger lens, you can just zoom in and isolate things. Again, I love old farmyards and little snickets and ginnels, and this is a footpath through a farmyard in North Yorkshire, and it lends itself very much to that kind of photograph, the worn flagstones, the flowers, the cockeyed barn doors. Another one with the larger lens that just lets you isolate Holme Village there, the wall pattern and the trees. Just demonstrating that big lens again. I mean, you can take photos and then crop them on a laptop or whatever, but it's better in my view to try and get it right while you're out there looking at it. And if you have that extra lens with you, you can get half a dozen good photos of the same view just by changing lens and getting a different version of it. And this is Wharfdale, Upper Wharfdale. I'm stood up above Kettlewell looking up to Buckton, and you've just got that wonderful Dales network of walls and barns, trees, and it's really lovely with that 600mm lens just to zoom in and get that kind of detail. Same again, this is Flush House, a little hamlet above Holmfirth on a evening in early spring when the sun's just about to drop over the horizon. And you can see the length of the shadows on those walls and the shadows on the sheep, like sheep cowboys in some western, aren't they? A bit of a change from West Yorkshire. This is the Gliders and Cumidwell, and that's Triffin on the left in Snowdonia. And this is taken with a wide angle and with the polarizer on, and it's a place I'm very fond of. We've taken our kids round from when they were babies, we carried them round there and then they toddle round, and we got higher and higher up the hills, and eventually we got to the top of the Gliders with them. And this was the day that we did that. You go up into the Devil's Kitchen and you get this spectacular view down into the Coombe. And to me, I've stood there taking this picture and I thought, just need somebody stood on that rock, really. So that's my son, and I said, go and stand on the end of that rock, would you? And it is quite a drop off the end, and he was up for it. He did. He stood there, and then the little dog, which is one of my previous assistants, went and stood next to him and looked over the edge, and it just made the photo. And sometimes getting a person in a picture just takes it to a different dimension. We had a great day then. We scrambled up the Devil's Kitchen up to the top, and the mountain rescue helicopter was training, and they landed near us and had a chat and all that kind of thing. It's wonderful. I sometimes do this when I'm on my own, have the camera on a tripod, do a self timer, because the moors were spectacular this winter with the snow, but not very interesting without a figure or something in the shot. These guys here, that's the trig point on Black Hill, which would be dull without the people. So I hung around there and waited, and these guys arrived and got the sandwiches out, and that little dog there was hopefully looking up to get a bit of sandwich, and it just made the photo again. A couple walking along Ramsden Road in the Holme Valley in the winter holding hands. It would be nothing, that picture, without them. You know, I'd be interested in it, but without the figures in it, it's no context or anything. It just looks bleak and grim, doesn't it? And they're actually walking away from us, so I waited and waited till they just got on the little horizon on the lane there, and then took the picture. And this down in the valley there is Holme Firth, and we very rarely get temperature inversions here. But if there's no wind forecast and you wake up in the winter and it's damp and misty in Holme Firth, I will get in the car and drive up to Holme Moss, and usually by the time you get to Holme Village, you're out in the bright sunshine and the valley is filled with fog like that. But again, it needed something else in it. It needed a person stood there. So I took Sally, my other half, and got her to stand there looking at the view. And a wonderful view it is when it's like that. And there's all sorts of bits and pieces lying around in the countryside, old tractors and junk, and rust buckets like this in the grass. And I find them very appealing to photograph. I mean, this must be several generations of tractors on this farm. But when they've come to the end of the working days, they just parked up. And then 30 years later, the next one's parked up, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's about a dozen of these here. Wonderful things. And I imagine one day, it's quite a ramshackle place, this, but it's still farmed. I imagine, you know, when the present encumbrant dies or leaves, it'll just be all cleared away and tidied up, which I think is a little bit sad. And just look out for details. This little gate here, I've walked past it dozens of times, but one evening the sun was just catching it like that, and catching the lichens and the mosses and the rust on the gate. Most of the time I've walked past and never noticed any of that detail. And this was at the start of lockdown. It says stay safe, and it's a rainbow on the sheep. And I took this photo with the long lens because it looked quite amusing, and ended up meeting the farmer, Mr. Sykes, and I gave him a print of this, and he let me into a secret. This was about the 7th sheep he tried it on until he got it right. So it got quite a lot of local coverage, that one. But there are seven other funny looking sheep with spray paint on them that were illegible. And just a little bit, the lens, the big lens, I got partly to do some wildlife photography of the wildlife on Holme Moss, and the mountain hares in particular. This is one in the summer. You can see the bog cotton in the background, and the hare there almost fully back to being brown. And last lockdown, I spent days up there looking for these hares and photographing them, because I just needed something different, some other project to do, really. And they go completely white in the winter, completely white. And when it's cold and windy, they hunker down in the vegetation like this, out of the wind. And you can actually get very close to them, you know, within 5 or 6 yards. And I got to know where they all are. And I always approach them in plain sight. And I think they recognised me in the end. By about February, I think they were sort of thinking to themselves, it's that bloke from Holme Firth again, because I could walk up to them like this and sit for a couple of minutes, take some pictures, and then slowly back out and walk away without disturbing them. Just a bit more of that mist around Holme Firth. Lovely details at Flush House again. And bog cotton. A couple of years ago, after a really wet winter and cold spring, this stuff really seems to explode at the end of May and in June. And this looked like a snowdrift. And I walked up to investigate it. And as I got closer, of course, it was so dense, but it was moving backwards and forwards in the wind, and it was bog cotton. And again, it perspective, I've sat down in the bog here on my backside and got as close as I could to this stuff as it swayed in the wind. Absolutely gorgeous, I think it is. And that patch has never been there since that year. It seems to move about all over the place. But when you get it like that, it's wonderful stuff. And footpaths, the footpaths we walk, they make lovely studies. This is a path from the National Park Centre at Grassington down to the river. And after a shower of rain, everything's wet and the detail comes out. And you've got that lovely deep perspective, you know, into the path with the walls and the path surface. And a typical West Yorkshire footpath below Studley Pike, a lovely slippery style and a tied up gate and a lane choked with bog and soft rush and a footpath sign. It's nice to look at. It's not always nice to walk, but you know, I think it makes a lovely, attractive, characterful little shot of the area, that actually. And this is typical Holme Valley scenery. This sign has disappeared 15 times, I think, in the last 10 years. And as soon as lockdown was imposed on us a year last March, this was lifted out and chucked in the undergrowth immediately. But Kirklees did put it back up a month, about 8 months later. And one of the benefits of lockdown was people started using this path, which wasn't that well used, and it's still getting used now. And a lot of the less used paths in the area were brought back into use with lockdown, and that seems to have carried on. And black and white suits footpaths and this kind of landscape as well. This didn't work in colour at all, this shot, but you can flip it into black and white on Lightroom and, you know, see if it works in black and white, which I think it does. Pennine Way on Black Hill through the bog cotton in the summer, I mean, you just can't beat that. I think it's wonderful up there. The restoration that's gone on since I knew it in the early 80s, when it was just a morass of peat and water that went up to your knees or worse in, and now it's like this. And being a footpath inspector, you know all these little nooks and crannies that people never visit, and if you stand on top of that stile there, you get this wonderful view of the Holme Valley and Holme Moss. And, you know, if I wasn't walking past, I'd never get to see that kind of view. There's more to footpaths than just walking and hiking. There's an artistic sort of side to them as well. Now, am I running over here, David, or?
No, you carry on, Andy. We're absolutely fascinated.
A few more minutes, and
Yep.
This is another piece of my equipment that I use. I don't like getting up early, but often the light is better early or late on. And I've always done backpacking. I've walked all over and lived out of a tent and out of a rucksack. And for photography, if you walk up onto a hill in the evening, you get the evening light and then you get the morning light. This is on top of Great Whernside above Kettlewell. Beautiful evening, absolutely gorgeous evening. You got all that lovely light in the evening, nice cozy night in the tent with a dog. And this was about 5 in the morning because it was July, Pendle Hill in the distance, and just a little flash of sunlight catching the dale below, and all the cloud came down and the mist came down, and I went back to bed till about 8 o'clock, but I'd got a nice photograph. And this was the same morning, 9 o'clock, when I set off walking, and that lovely, wonderful rolling dales scenery. You see all the way to Pennygent and Ingleborough. Absolutely beautiful morning, that. That's one of my favourite hills up there. I camp up there nearly every year, actually. So it's not everyone's cup of tea camping out, but this again was from a camp on the North Yorkshire moors, and it was a sunset, which was a very long way away, but I used the long lens. And the hill you see on the left there is Roseby Topping, and the sun going down over Teesside. Very spectacular sunset that was. And on the other hand, you get these lovely mornings. This is Littondale, and I just literally stood up out of the tent to see if there was a temperature inversion, and there's this lovely bit of mist just drifting around down cliff and up the valley. And by the time most people get up, this kind of thing's disappeared. It's gone. It doesn't take much in the summer to lift that up and take it away. But when you catch these moments, it's absolutely magical. It really is wonderful, because you're always the only person there, and that's down in the valley. All this mist was just toing and froing like a tide, really. It's not a static thing, mist. It moves. It changes by the minute. And this is I was walking by foxes this night, way before the sun came up, 3:45 or something like that. So I decided to go for a walk, and I got up on this little hilltop. It's in Exmoor, this. Decided I'd just sit and wait and watch the sunrise, and it was wonderful. And all this lovely mist in the valley just came and went, and the sun came out of it. By the time, by 5 o'clock, it was all gone, just gone. I've not put many pictures of Scotland in here because it's too easy to take a photograph in Scotland. If the weather's nice, you can just point your camera in any direction and get something like that. You don't really have to think about it. But this was on the West Highland Way a couple of years ago, and I'd camped at the bottom of the Devil's Staircase because I was tired and I couldn't face doing it in the afternoon, so I had an early finish and stopped there. I got up at 6 o'clock for a comfort break, and there's Buccleuch Moor just catching the morning sun. Absolutely fabulous it was. Superb. So I just put the kettle on then and had a coffee and just sat there and watched that for an hour or so, and then took off up the footpath. And locally, I do go up to Holme Moss and Saddleworth Moor quite a bit and camp out, particularly in the summer months on the longer kind of nights when you can watch the sunset or watch thunderstorms. This is the other end of the spectrum. This was Grinsbrook above Edale on a February night when I went to camp out, and I could see the sun was going to set, and it was just catching the snow here. So I ran to get this photograph. I ran about 50 yards with my rucksack on, collapsed in the snow, and just got that shot there just before the sun disappeared behind the clouds again. It was very, very cold night actually, but worth it for that. And I got some lovely shots in the morning as well, because Edale was full of mist in the morning. And sometimes you really are just in the right place at the right time. This is Digley Reservoir. 7 or 8 years ago, a really cold snap, and the reservoir had actually solidly frozen over, which I've never seen before. And then there was a bit of a thaw, and some patches of water kind of appeared, and I'd gone up there for a walk on a bitterly cold afternoon. The weather was grey, and there was just a gap in the cloud as the sun was setting, and the sun just hit the water at the right angle and just turned it this wonderful sort of shade of liquid gold, really. I'll never forget that. And I get asked, "Oh, you've photoshopped that, haven't you? You must have fiddled with that one." And no, that's, that is how it was. And there's 2 other people on the other side looking at it as well. This is the same place, and it's not often the wind doesn't blow up there, but you can have the reflection's so good on here, you can have it either way around, because it makes no difference. But the water is at the bottom, and the sky is perfectly reflected in it, and those trees are, there's cows in the field reflected in the water. It was so still, it was like glass. And I've actually mounted that up in mounts before. They're upside down the wrong way around. Good old Holme Valley, Don't Edge. You can't go wrong up there when the heather's out. It's a lovely place, lovely long views, lovely August evenings up there. These are more, I sell a lot of greeting cards, so this type of things, it's a commercial kind of image. It's for a certain market, it's brighter than pictures I would normally take for my own satisfaction. But the heather up there amongst the gritstone is wonderful in the summer, especially on an evening when the sun's getting low. Warms up the colours in the rock and the heather. And that's that's my kind of photo. That's, you know, that's what the Pennines are. It's grim, it's grey. There's shafts of light coming through the clouds, you know, a bit of snow on the ground. You can really get the essence of the place, I would hope, by looking at that. You might not fancy it, but, you know, hopefully it says something about here and this place and what it can be like, you know, and how variable it is from day to day, month to month. Studley Pike, I'm going to Calderdale quite a lot at the moment, and that is a wonderful valley, Calderdale. It's superb. There's so many rights away up there and so many little side valleys and cloughs. It's absolutely stunning, and the light changes all the time. It's a wonderful place. And that was one a couple of weekends ago, just that old lovely mill there, against that sky and the hills, a lovely bit of sort of heritage. It's housing now, that it's been very nicely converted into flats, and yet it still looks like a mill, and it still sort of fits in there, and it really, well, it makes that photo, that chimney in that mill building, I think. And sheep, these are out the back of our house. It takes me about 15 minutes to walk there, so whenever it snows, these sheep always get fed in that corner. They're always there all winter, so that's my first port of call on a morning. As soon as I get up, I'll go and see these sheep and see what they're up to. And they don't move about much when it's cold on a morning. They just want the silage or the hay, and, you know, come round a bit, and they're quite happy to have the photograph taken. I think I'm nearly done now. Yes, there you go. That's my last one. That's Cartworth Moor Farm. That's my best Ashley Jackson photograph, that one. I wish I could sell them to President Clinton for 30 grand, but, you know, I don't think I can. He's a nice guy, Ashley, actually. I do know him, and he said some very complimentary things about some of my work.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been absolutely fascinating. I feel I know the Holme Valley a whole lot better now than I did before, as well as enjoying your photos. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And it's been great having you on this series of talks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.